Hello everyone, my name is Daniel and I am back with a new post that really gets to the heart of if it's possible to prove that 32 AD is the year of the cross, then you have proven a lunar Sabbath. And this is a follow-up to my correction I made about the days a week being off. And my last video, I spent a lot of time in Stellarium showing how you can calculate it. And in this post, I want to get right to the core of the mistake that I believe that Jared has made, so that everyone can see where he went wrong, and not just how to prove it right, but it's a common mistake that we can all make. This is important because the day of the week is a critical part of determining when the Sabbath is and determining which years most people consider viable for the crucifixion. And then, of course, that impacts prophecy when he was returning after 2,000 years. So there's a lot of knock-on effects where if you have the wrong day of the week, you might believe the wrong Sabbath. And that's a problem. It's a problem if you desire to keep the Sabbath. So this is his video where he introduced his case for 32 AD. And I agree that 32 AD is the year. And I agree that there are signs in the sun, moon, and stars that kind of highlight that year and make it special compared to other years. And there's lots of evidence that I can make 32 AD work from sources other than relying on weekdays. And that's why I'm a Lunar Sabbath follower, because the Lunar Sabbath can work on any year. And so you have to prove the year independent of the calendar choice. So, this video was then referenced by Dr. Barry Ah, and Dr. Barry Ah made a very salient point. The entire prophecy field is running into trouble because with 2,000 years from the cross, 31 AD plus 2,000 years minus 7 is 2024, and that's past. So all the theories and arguments for 30 AD and 31 AD are out the window, and we're left with 32 AD. And when you get to 33 AD, now you have new problems that crop up, and by the time you get to 34, you're past the window of 490 years from the order to rebuild Jerusalem. So we've got 32 and 33 AD as the remaining years that we can consider that still work with a rapture 7 years before a 2,000-year return. And there's Roman records that talk about the death of Yeshua before 33 AD. So that leaves us only with 32 AD fitting all the facts. And the Chinese records can have the reign of Emperor Wu be 31 or 32, depending on when you do the regal years. So 32 is huge, and the day of the week in 32 AD can have a big impact on whether or not you can keep Saturday or you have to switch to a lunar Sabbath. And that's what I like to do, is I like to create tests, hypothesis, experiments that you can perform that are independent and verify things, right? So I'm going to demonstrate some of those things in this video. So, Jarrett's discovery of 2 days difference was very appealing to me. It was so appealing to me that, after doing some initial checks and making a sign error that ended up confirming his original numbers, I published and I had to retract, because I was like, wow, this is huge news if there's a 2 day difference, and everyone's been, literally everyone has been using the wrong date. And that should have been my first clue. How can everyone be wrong except Jarrett? So we're going to dive into that. So, Jarrett and I talk a lot, And I wanted to understand where he was coming from. Maybe I'm the one that was wrong. And so I really tried to understand and figure out his math and understand his points. And I spent lots of hours in trying to figure out, Julian year lengths, Gregorian year lengths, and all the different unit conversions. And that ended up being a rabbit trail because the root is really very simple. This is what he said. What's fun is that Stellarium actually has that date change on 10/4/1582. Stellarium uses Gregorian dates for BC dates. It normalized all dates to the Gregorian, which is fine unless you're trying to be precise about the day of the week. So that's his claim. That's his perspective on what he's doing. So based upon this assumption, he proceeded to translate the date 4/14/32 AD, which is what was shown in Stellarium with the blood moon. He interprets it as a Gregorian date, then he converts it to Julian, date of 4/16/32 AD, which is a correct conversion if this is a Gregorian date. And then he calculates the Julian day of week of 4/16 as a Wednesday, which is also correct. And while it is true that 4/16 is a Wednesday, it is 2 days after the eclipse, which was actually on 4/14/32 Julian. So how do we know the eclipse was on 4/14 Julian and not 4/14 Gregorian? Well, this is the documentation straight from Stellarium's website. Stellarium uses Julian numbers internally, and the conventional approach of using the Gregorian calendar for dates after 1582. For dates before that, the Julian calendar is used. So is 4/16/32 before this date? Yes. Therefore, they're following the conventional approach, which is to interpret it as a Julian date. All right, and here is what NASA says. NASA says the eclipse occurred on April 14th, 32 AD. And from the same exact page, here is NASA's documentation of what calendar they're using. It says the Gregorian calendar used for all dates from 1582 October onwards. So that's the Gregorian calendar for everything after that. But before that date, the Julian calendar is used. Is this before that date? Yes. So this is a Julian date. So NASA and Stellarium both utilize the same method of interpreting dates before 1582 as Julian. They both document that that's what they're doing. And after that, they use Gregorian. Therefore, when you see a date in Stellarium of 4/14/32, you know it's interpreting it as Julian. And NASA is the second witness that this is indeed what Stellarium is doing, because both Stellarium and NASA show a blood moon on that date. Two sources of documentation, two approaches, they both agree on what's in the sky on that day. And lastly, there's the sanity check that I did in my last video using Stellarium of counting the total number of solar days between two night skies shown in the simulation, and then using that to determine the offset in the day of the week. If you use that check, it confirms that 4/13/32 is a Julian date. So, what are the implications? Now, hopefully the evidence I have presented here is sufficient to produce retractions by Dr. Berry and any others who have cited Jarrett's work. And I pray that Jarrett is able to work through his unit conversion error and mistaken assumptions about the calendar and the dates reported by NASA and Stellarium. Right? He's basically saying they're doing this, and he's saying the opposite of what their own documentation is saying. And I haven't seen any evidence that their documentation is wrong. So the error is as basic as mistaking degrees in Fahrenheit for degrees in Celsius and then passing a Fahrenheit value into a Celsius to Fahrenheit conversion function. It can happen to anyone, and even NASA has lost billion-dollar Mars rovers over mistaken unit conversions. So I'm not picking on Jarrett for making a mistake. I made a mistake. I had a sign error, and then I confirmed it. Right? I confirmed what he did, and then I had to retract it. Everyone makes mistakes. That's not an issue. The goal here is to help everyone get to the truth and know why it's the truth. And why do they have to know the day of the week truth? So we can be on the right Sabbath. Why do we want to be on the right Sabbath? Because the Sabbath is a sign between us and Yah that we are His. And I believe that He reveals His Sabbath to His people if they seek it. And so that's what we should do. And I'm not saying having the right Sabbath conclusion is necessary for salvation. I'm saying the desire to know the true Sabbath and doing your homework is evidence that you value His law and His intent and His will. Pray that His will be done. And what is His will? His Sabbath, His calendar. That's what we should be praying in our life. So, I had hoped to convince Jared via hours and hours of back and forth text messages, but as of this writing, have failed. So, this is what Jared said. I normalized the Gregorian calendar. NASA uses the Gregorian calendar as well as Stellarium. So here he's reasserting the documentation, something contrary to the documentation, and he's asserting it after I revealed the information above. So I said, I sent you the screenshot and the evidence that they used Julian for dates before 1582. Look at the right bottom of the NASA website where they state the calendar is used, and he was done with the conversation. So that's where we are. I hope that maybe he'll also marinate and he'll retract it, but as of this recording, that doesn't look likely. So I suspect he might produce another video. So I will attempt to front run some of his attempted arguments that he was using in these hours of conversation, just so that everyone can be prepared and process it, and I don't have to produce another video in the future. So he kept pointing me to Zeller's congruence algorithm. He brings it over and over and over again. And this is the analogy of someone keep pointing you to the formula for converting from Fahrenheit to Celsius, but that doesn't matter if you're passing a Celsius value into the conversion function that expects a Fahrenheit value. So he showed me this algorithm, and then he showed me this website, and he put in the date, and he shows, look, it's a Wednesday. And this is right. This is an accurate conversion of the Julian date of 4/16/32 to Wednesday. But the problem is the 4/16 date that you input is the result of interpreting 4/14/32 as Julian, as a Gregorian date, and then converting that back to Julian. So the use of the calculator is already wrong. And I apologize. I'm a little sick right now and have been, so that's why I look tired. But I'm doing my best to get this information out to you. So, since I am a programmer, I directed Jarrett to Geeks for Geeks, where they provide code samples. They provide the equations for calculating the day of week of any day on either calendar, Gregorian or Julian. And just for fun, I implemented it in C++ and put the dates in and proved that Monday is the right day using the very algorithm he's quoting. There's nothing wrong with the conversion function. It's the input to the function. If you're not reading the documentation properly on Stellarium or NASA's website and you misinterpret a table and you think it's reporting temperature in Celsius, but it's reporting temperature in Fahrenheit, and then you go throw it in a conversion function, you're going to get the wrong output. You have to follow the documentation. And he would keep pointing me to this, which he showed in his videos, which shows that there's a 2-day offset, and that's the proper way to do a temperature conversion or a date conversion. But this is already after the error. The error was in interpreting NASA's data as a Gregorian date when they're reporting it in Julian. So he has, showed this many times. All right, enough of that. Prove 32 AD and you prove the Lunar Sabbath. Dr. Berry makes the case very well that it must be 32 AD because 32 AD plus 2000 minus 7 takes you to 2025. And any year before 32 AD would mean the rapture isn't the start of the 7-year tribulation that so many expect. So hopefully we are all on the same page that a 32 AD has a Passover on a Sunday, Monday, or Tuesday, depending on when you start your month. And all of these dates are incompatible with Scripture and a Saturday Sabbath. Right? That combination is just incompatible with what we have of crucifixion week. And so only lunar Sabbath calendar theories, regardless of when you start the month, are compatible with 32 AD, and 32 AD is the last year standing that isn't ruled out by other evidence. So if you haven't considered the evidence for a lunar Sabbath, I ask you to seriously dig into it, because the evidence against the Saturday Sabbath is mounting. And one of the things that I think is very helpful is to study the evidence that first fruits is always on the 16th, and that Yeshua rose on the first fruits. And if you know he died on the 14th and he rose on the 16th, you know where the 3 days and 3 nights are, because it's just right there. And with that understanding, you can eliminate any year in which the crucifixion isn't on a Friday, because that's the only year that would allow you to have the same pattern of 14, 15, 16, right? That pattern there. So there you go. That's process of elimination. We know Lunar Sabbath was a thing. It was documented by Philo and the Jewish Encyclopedia. It's not a new invention. It's a very old and ancient thing. It's just a question of, were the Jews using it? Was Yah using it? And just something to think about. All right. I pray you have a blessed day.